It begins, as so many online tragedies do, with a ping. A 12-year-old girl in the Midwest, restless and lonely during the second year of the pandemic, logs into Discord one evening. Her parents think she's talking with classmates or playing Minecraft. Instead, she finds herself in a dimly lit digital chamber where strangers greet her with equal parts warmth and menace. The usernames are strange: Felix, War, Trippy, Rabid. The welcome messages are flattering but threaded with threats. Within days, she is carving words into her arm with a razor blade, filming the bloodied results, and uploading them as proof of loyalty to something she barely understands. 764. This is not an isolated story. It is the opening act of one of the most disturbing online cults to surface in the past decade. Known simply as 764, the network of teenagers and young adults combined the aesthetics of nihilism and neo-Nazism with a sadistic hunger for control. Their chosen weapons were not bombs or rifles, but Discord servers, Telegram groups, and the vulnerabilities of children. By the time the FBI designated 764 a Tier 1 investigative priority, the group had already spread across continents, ensnared thousands of victims, and fractured into splinters that persist today. So today, we are going to try to understand the ununderstandable. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post at least one cult deep dive every single week, so if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. I'd absolutely love to have you here. This is such an intricate and intriguing case, and deeply, deeply concerning for parents all over the world. And to understand how a handful of teenagers could try to orchestrate something so destructive, one has to go back to the beginning. Back to a Texas zip code, a teenage boy with a fascination for gore, and a friendship forged in a Minecraft chat room. Bradley Chance Cadenhead was a teenager in Stephenville, Texas, when he discovered the intoxicating power of the internet. He was not the archetypal cult leader in the flesh. No long hair, no robes, no crowded compound, but rather a restless boy whose curiosity about violence metastasized online. By his own admission later to investigators, he had been drawn to images of gore from a young age. Unlike many peers who brushed against disturbing corners of the web and recoiled when they did come upon them, Cadenhead seemed to lean in. In 2001, the pandemic still pressed down on young people around the world. Isolation was routine, and parents were stretched thin. Classrooms were all digital. For Cadenhead, this was fertile ground. Through Minecraft, he connected with another young man equally drawn to violent aesthetics, and the two began sketching out what would become 764, a secretive society that blurred the lines between extremist ideology and sadistic entertainment. The name came easily. Caden had plucked it from the first three digits of his own hometown, zip code 764, a banal number transformed into a symbol of dread. But what's really fascinating is while I was researching this video, I discovered another cult group that started back, I think, in the between the 40s and the 60s. That's called the 764 organization. So I will most likely be jumping into that as well, but these are actually two separate entities. Today, we're talking about the online cult 764 that was led by a teenage boy, not 764 organization. fascinating and crazy that I have to even make that distinction, and I keep trying to find a way that these two might be intertwined in some way. But apparently, for this video, this group, it was named as a private joke at first, just a way to mask something sinister behind a meaningless string of numbers. But like so much in internet culture, what began as ironic posturing hardened into full blown identity. Soon, 764 was not just a name, it was a brand. The earlier server lived on Discord, a platform designed for gaming communities but infamous for its porous moderation. At first, the group's chats resembled a teenage version of trolling, shocking memes, violent jokes, and a kind of digital one-upmanship to prove who could be the most transgressive. But almost immediately, the tone shifted. Cadenhead, who adopted the alias Felix, imposed hierarchy. He cultivated an atmosphere where cruelty was currency. Members earned status by sharing increasingly disturbing images, taunting outsiders, and proving their loyalty through acts of self harm. Now, it would be a mistake to call these first steps merely pranks. From the beginning, 764 borrowed tactics from older, darker groups. One predecessor was CVLT, a decentralized online community that had blended child exploitation with neo Nazi rhetoric. CVLT was already notorious on fringe forums for grooming minors and encouraging violence. And Felix, well, he studied it, he learned from it, and he borrowed wholesale. Where CVLT thrived on chaotic cruelty, 764 attempted something more organized. To recruit, Felix and his associates lurked in spaces where vulnerable kids gathered: Roblox, Minecraft, YouTube comment sections, and even Instagram DMs. They looked for the quiet ones, the users who posted about depression, loneliness, or family trouble. A private message would follow, often friendly at first. "You seem cool, want to join a server?" But that server was 764. And I truly don't know if there is anything more vile than preying upon isolated, depressed children who probably don't have a full understanding of what exactly they are feeling. It's absolutely horrifying and heartbreaking, and just goes to show just how important it is to monitor what our children are doing online. I have a little sister who is 12, and the fact that she could have access to something like this, or fall upon it, or have a bad day and start being encouraged to do bad things to herself, it's absolutely heartbreaking to think about. And this only supports my next point, because what made 764 different wasn't just the ideology, though its fusion of nihilism, sadism, and extremist aesthetics was unique. It was the deliberate targeting of children as young as 9. In grooming minors, Felix and his circle found an endless supply of followers who could be manipulated into self destructive acts. Some victims were encouraged to burn themselves, to cut words into their own skin, to abuse pets or their siblings, all of which would be recorded and shared as proof of loyalty. It's also acting as collateral for this deranged teenage cult leader. By 2021, the small Discord experiment had become a network, and word spread quickly. Screenshots of bloody fan signs, photos of teenagers' arms carved with 764 circulated as propaganda. The group was expanding beyond Texas, beyond America, all the way into Canada, Europe, and Australia. What began with a teenage boy in Stephenville had grown into this international online cult. And by the spring of 2022, the tone inside 764 servers had shifted from disturbing initiation rituals to outright terror. What began with carved names and shock memes evolved into campaigns of essay, blackmail, and violent coercion. Children who had once joined for companionship now found themselves trapped in a cycle of degradation. The mechanics of the abuse followed a familiar script. A recruit, often a young teenager, would be coaxed into sharing a nude photo framed as a dare or proof of loyalty. The moment the image was sent, the tone would change. Leaders would threaten to expose that child to friends, family, or school authorities if they did not comply with further demands like self harm or torturing their animals. Some were ordered to produce more explicit material, and others were told to cut themselves on camera. Still, others were punished into committing acts of violence against siblings. Victims described the experience as feeling both trapped but also addictive. On one hand, they were absolutely terrified. Every keystroke was monitored, every refusal punished with threats. But on the other hand, the group offered what seemed like acceptance. Members told them that they were part of a family, that their suffering proved that they belonged. It was a masterclass in coercion. Break someone down, then offer them the only comfort available. And the violence was not limited to the victims' private lives. Leaders began fantasizing about school shootings and mass killings, encouraging followers to plot real world attacks. In some cases, they instructed members to research weaponry, scout potential targets, or record, quote, practice videos. Though many of these plots did not materialize, the intent was unmistakable. Law enforcement would later describe 764 as occupying a, quote, them adjacent, unquote, space, an extremist network that blurred the lines between online sadism and offline violence. One of the most chilling aspects of this period was the group's obsession with spectacle. Members didn't just want control, they wanted documentation. Every act of self harm, every coerced photo, every plan for violence was recorded, archived, and shared. Images of carved arms and bloodied faces circulated like badges of honor. The more extreme the content, the higher one's status rose in the group. By now, 764 had begun to splinter into specialized factions. There was 764 Inferno, which focused heavily on child essay material. There was No Lives Matter, a subgroup steeped in accelerationist rhetoric and obsessed with mass killings. And other offshoots style themselves as secret societies or hacker collectives, each with its own flavor but the same core DNA: cruelty as community. Together, these offshoots formed what insiders called the Com, short for community, but with the ominous undertone of a criminal syndicate. For parents and outsiders, the signs were subtle but devastating. A teenager who once seemed outgoing suddenly retreated into their room, spending nights glued to a glowing screen. They wore sleeves to hide scars. They became irritable, anxious, or vacant. In some cases, parents stumbled across grotesque images saved on devices with strange captions or usernames scrawled into skin. By the time they realized what was happening, their children were already ensnared. And authorities began to connect the dots. Reports of self harm linked to Discord servers landed on FBI desks. International partners, Canada's RCMP, Europol, and the Australian Federal Police flagged similar patterns. The name 764 cropped up repeatedly. What had started as a zip code joke in Texas was now a red flag in the law enforcement briefings on 3 separate continents. Inside the group, leaders sensed the scrutiny and they tried to adapt. Servers were rebranded. Chats were moved to Telegram, where encryption made infiltration more difficult. Recruitment expanded further into gaming platforms where moderators struggled to detect the hidden currents beneath seemingly innocent avatars. For every server shut down, another rose in its place. The violence had escalated, and with it, the stakes. What law enforcement was only beginning to realize was that they were not dealing with isolated predators or scattered trolls, but with a network that was learning, evolving, and metastasizing in real time. The cult in the wires had grown teeth. By mid 2022, 764 had become too large and too infamous to remain a single organization. Law enforcement scrutiny was intensifying, and Discord's moderation teams, while often a step behind, were beginning to shut down servers linked to the group. Yet, what might have destroyed a less resilient network only made 764 more adaptive. And rather than collapsing, it just splintered, multiplying like shards of broken glass. But inside the community, the cracks were visible. Leaders bickered over strategy and ego. Some wanted to double down on sadism and sexual exploitation, and others leaned harder into extremist ideology, envisioning 764 as the vanguard of an online terrorist underground. When conflicts erupted, the solution was simple. Factions would break away and create new servers, often carrying familiar branding. Inferno, No Lives Matter, Leak Society, Sewer, Hell. Each subgroup took on its own identity, but it all traced their lineage back to the same origin, Felix's 764. And collectively, insiders began to call this web of factions the Com. To members, belonging to the Com meant belonging to a larger movement. And no matter which subgroup they pledged allegiance to, they were still part of it. To outsiders, it was a reminder that even if one server was dismantled, the broader network would persist. And this splintering did have tactical advantages. It made infiltration harder, and investigators who managed to shut down one cell often found themselves chasing a dozen more. And it also created this illusion of ubiquity. For vulnerable teenagers lured into the network, the comms seemed inescapable. If they left one server, another would appear. If they blocked one recruiter, another popped up under a new username. The group's presence was Hydra like, multi headed, and impossible to kill with a single strike. 764 Inferno became notorious for orchestrating child SA, coercing victims to produce explicit content under threat of exposure. No Lives Matter leaned into nihilism and accelerationism, encouraging members to glorify mass shootings and acts of terror. Leak Society focused on humiliation, doxing, and releasing victims' private information. And others, like Hell and Sewer, combined elements of gore sharing, blackmail, and recruitment into new generations of servers. What unified them was a culture of ritualized cruelty. Fan signing remained a rite of passage. Tactics became more refined as leaders traded strategies in hidden Telegram channels. Some subgroups even developed ranking systems where members gained prestige by demonstrating control over victims or by producing ever more shocking content. The grotesque became gamified. And internationally, the COM expanded at alarming speed. Arrest records and victim reports later revealed that servers operating in Canada, Germany, Romania, Australia, Sweden, Brazil, and the UK. In some countries, local police only learned of the network after teenagers were hospitalized for self inflicted wounds or parents reported extortion schemes. In others, intelligence agencies began quietly tracking 764 alongside Islamists and neo Nazi groups, recognizing that its blend of child exploitation and extremist ideology posed a novel kind of threat. And despite its amorphous structure, 764's branding remained distinct. Screenshots from servers show dark, violent imagery, often adorned with Nazi symbols, Satanist sigils, or glitchy digital art. The group projected itself as a larger than life, with a hidden order that had tentacles spreading everywhere. For frightened victims, the message was clear. You cannot escape. By late 2022, journalists, researchers, and parents were beginning to sound alarm. Reports emerged of children carving names into their arms, of coerced videos circulating on the dark web, and of teens convinced that 764 could track their every move. Yet public understanding lagged behind the group's spread. To many, 764 was just another inscrutable number, just an online rumor. It was only to those inside, or those hunting it, who understood the scope of what was happening. Law enforcement faced a maddening paradox. The more they cracked down, the more the group fragmented. Each arrest created martyrs, fueling propaganda that the state was terrified of their power. Each takedown of a server was spun as proof of the group's resilience. The calm was not just surviving, it was thriving on the attention. By late 2022, whispers about 764 were surfacing beyond those hidden corners of Discord and Telegram. It wasn't until law enforcement began to connect scattered reports that the magnitude of the threat became clear. Agents in different states were receiving similar cases. Teenagers coerced into sexual acts, instructed to harm themselves, or threatened into silence by anonymous online figures. When investigators compared notes, The same number surfaced again and again: 764. And in early 2023, the FBI classified 764 as a Tier 1 priority, the same designation used for the most dangerous domestic extremist threats. This was not a casual decision. Tier 1 meant that every FBI field office in all 55 of them was tasked with investigating 764 related cases. Hundreds of agents, cybercrime experts, and analysts were pulled into the effort. For the first time, the group was being treated as something more than just an internet menace. It was a matter of national security. Warnings began to flow outward. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police issued alerts to schools and parents about the network's tactics. In Australia, federal authorities added 764 to their roster of extremist threats. Across Europe, police flagged the network in briefings on terrorism and child exploitation. The common theme was chilling. 764 was not just exploiting children online. It was attempting to radicalize them, weaponize them, and blur the boundary between sadistic abuse and political violence. And platforms scrambled to respond. Discord banned hundreds of servers linked to the group, though members were quick to rebuild under new names. Roblox and Minecraft tightened moderation, but recruiters slipped through with new avatars. Telegram, with its encrypted architecture, became a haven where splinter groups thrived. Every corporate takedown was a temporary victory, followed by whack-a-mole resurgence. And the media, too, was finally beginning to catch on. Investigative reports from Wired, Der Spiegel, and The Washington Post published in-depth exposés tracing how teenagers across continents were lured into self-harm and exploitation. These articles shocked readers with descriptions of fan signing rituals, of coerced abuse carried out in bedrooms under the threat of exposure. It told tales of children convinced that they were part of something vast and inescapable. For victims and their families, the FBI's public recognition of 764 was both validation and terror. Validation because, at last, their children's experiences were being taken seriously, but terror because the scale of the network confirmed their worst fears. Their sons and daughters were not alone in being targeted. They were not safe. Thousands of others were caught in the same web. In congressional hearings and law enforcement conferences, 764 was described as a nexus of extremism and exploitation. It wasn't simply a child predator ring, though it also was that. But it also wasn't only an extremist cell, though its neo-Nazi influences were undeniable. It was both and all things at once, something new, something law enforcement lacked a blueprint to confront. And inside the servers, members reveled in the attention. FBI bulletins and media articles were posted as trophies. Every news story, every warning from the authorities became propaganda. If the government was afraid, they reasoned that they must be powerful. The paradox was cruel. The more the outside world condemned 764, the more attractive it appeared to the very children it preyed upon. By mid-2023, it was clear that 764 had moved from the shadows and into the spotlight. The network had forced parents, journalists, and governments to acknowledge a new breed of digital cult, one that thrived on chaos, exploited the vulnerable, and proved far harder to dismantle than anyone could ever imagine. By the time law enforcement publicly declared 764 a top-tier threat, investigators had already had their eyes on the group's founder. Bradley Chance Cadenhead, known online as Felix, had been under surveillance since 2021. His obsession with gore and his role in building the original 764 servers were no longer just rumors circulating among teenagers. They were documented in terabytes of seized chat logs and images. In August 2021, police in Texas moved in. Cadenhead was arrested in Stephenville, his own hometown, after agents uncovered a trove of child SA material on his devices. And the charges were severe: possession and distribution of child combined with allegations of coercion and exploitation. For a boy who had started with a Minecraft chat room, the fall was swift and total. In 2023, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, his name forever tied to the cult that he had created. But taking down Felix did not stop 764. If anything, it emboldened others to rise in his place. Leadership shifted to lieutenants spread across different countries. One of the most notorious was a Romanian national known by the alias Francesco or simply Riley. He kept servers alive, expanded recruitment, and oversaw some of the group's darkest periods. Romanian authorities eventually arrested him, charging him with producing child pornography and ties to extremist networks. His conviction underscored that 764 was not bound by borders. It was a multinational organism. And arrests continued. In late 2024, a U.S. man named Richard Anthony Reyna Densmore, who operated under the alias Rabid and ran a splinter group called Sewer, was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Prosecutors revealed that he had coerced minors into sexual acts, extorted victims with threats of exposure, and had overseen violent rituals inside his faction. Densmore's sentencing statement was grim. The judge acknowledged that what he participated in was not only abuse, but part of a broader movement designed to destroy lives. Even as these convictions rolled in, 764 remained dangerous. In April 2025, two new names dominated headlines. Prasen Nepal, a 20-year-old from North Carolina known as Trippy, and Leonidas Varagianis, a 21-year-old living in Greece who went by War. Together, they led a faction called 764 Inferno. According to federal prosecutors, Inferno specialized in extortion and coercing victims into acts of self harm. Their servers were filled with recordings of teenagers mutilating themselves, convinced that compliance was the only way to avoid exposure. Nepal was arrested on U.S. soil, while Varagianis was detained overseas. His extradition is still pending, but prosecutors say that he faces charges that could carry decades in prison. This only proves 764's global reach and the coordination required to dismantle even one of its branches. Investigators revealed that Inferno had recruited victims across multiple continents and that its leaders often treated their followers as pawns in some sadistic game. Other arrests would soon follow. In Europe, young men affiliated with 764 were charged with child exploitation and extremist activity. In Brazil, a teenager linked to the group was arrested for plotting a school attack. In Germany and Italy, members faced charges related to bomb threats and distribution of child pornography. And each case only added to a grim tally. Hundreds of victims, dozens of arrests, and a movement that seemed to mutate faster than law enforcement could cut it down. Courtrooms became the stage where the secret horrors of 764 were finally spoken aloud. Parents testified about finding their children bleeding in bedrooms, driven to self harm by strangers on the internet. Survivors described the relentless coercion, the fear of exposure, and the sense that there was no escape. Prosecutors presented chat logs filled with threats, gore, and extremist propaganda, painting a picture of a network that was as sadistic as it was organized. And for many, the trials were the first time that they learned that 764 wasn't just an online rumor, but a tangible, prosecutable reality. The sentences handed down to Felix, to Rabid, to Trippy, and soon perhaps to War offered some measure of justice. But they also proved a haunting truth. Even as leaders fell, the network endured. By this year, 2025, the FBI had confirmed more than 250 active investigations tied to 764, spanning every one of its field offices. Internationally, Europol and Interpol tracked similar cases. The prosecutions struck at the heart of the group, but no single arrest could end it. 764 was never just one person, after all. It was never just one server. It was an idea, a cult that forged in the wires of the internet, too decentralized to vanish in a single blow. Now, researchers studying online extremism began to describe 764 as a crossover cult. Unlike traditional groups, it lacked a coherent ideology. Unlike standard predator rings, it cloaked use in the language of belonging and rebellion. Its members adopted Nazi symbols, satanic aesthetics, and accelerationist rhetoric not out of devotion, but because these emblems amplified the group's aura of power. For a lonely teenager, being told that they were part of an underground movement feared by governments felt electrifying. And so, even as leaders were sentenced and servers shut down, 764 endured in fragments. It lived on in screenshots passed between teenagers, in Telegram channels hidden behind coded invites, in usernames resurfacing under new guises. To call it dead would be premature. To call it invincible would be equally misleading. The truth lay somewhere in the middle. 764 was a wounded beast, but it was still capable of striking. By mid 2025, the story of 764 had entered a new phase. The group's founder was behind bars, and several of its most notorious leaders had been convicted or were awaiting trial, and law enforcement had launched hundreds of active investigations across the US and abroad. And yet, the specter of 764 lingered. For all the victories, there was no definitive ending, no declaration that the network had been dismantled once and for all. What endured was not so much a single organization as a culture. Screenshots of fan signs still circulated in hidden channels. Splinter servers continue to appear on Discord and Telegram. Recruits whispered about the group in gaming chats, fascinated by its reputation as a shadowy movement feared by parents and policed by the FBI. In that sense, 764 had achieved something few online groups had ever managed to. It had become mythic. The persistence of 764 has forced parents, educators, and policy members to grapple with the hard truths about the digital lives of children. For many families, the warning signs had been subtle. Late night gaming sessions, sudden mood swings, unexplainable scars. Few suspected that a global network of predators and extremists could be reaching directly into their children's bedrooms. The reality was sobering. Digital platforms had made the world smaller, but they had also made it more dangerous. For law enforcement, 764 represented a new kind of challenge. It was not a cartel with identifiable kingpins, nor a cell bound by ideology. It was some hybrid. It was a cult without borders, a predator ring cloaked in extremist aesthetics, a decentralized swarm that fed on secrecy and fear. Traditional tactics like arrests, takedowns, and prosecutions were necessary, but not sufficient. As quickly as one server disappeared, another arose. As one leader fell, another stepped into the void. It also raises urgent questions about platform responsibility. Discord, Roblox, and other companies had invested heavily in moderation, yet 764 evaded detection again and again. Critics argued that profit incentives discouraged truly aggressive policing of online spaces. Others pointed out the technical limits. With millions of active servers and chats, no moderation system could catch everything. But what was clear was that children were being harmed faster than platforms could respond. Researchers studying extremism and child exploitation began to frame 764 as this cautionary tale. Here is proof that the old boundaries between different types of online threats, whether it's terrorism, trolling, these were all dissolving. In 764, they converged. Neo-Nazi symbols were not just an ideology, but they were bait. Satanic aesthetics were not just rebellion, but camouflage. An isolated crime, but part of a system of control that made the network self-sustaining. And as for the survivors, lessons were deeply personal. Many still carry scars, both physical and psychological. Some had been hospitalized for self-harm. Others struggle with trust and are haunted by the feeling that they'd been part of something inescapable. Yet their testimonies became a powerful force in the fight against the group. By speaking out in courtrooms to journalists or in support groups, they broke the illusion that 764 was untouchable. Currently, the future of 764 still remains uncertain, unfortunately. It's weakened, but it's not yet gone. It's infamous, yet still alluring to some. It's fractured, but still alive in fragments. The FBI, Europol, and other agencies continue to devote resources to its dismantling, and parents and schools are more aware of the warning signs. Platforms are also under pressure to improve safeguards. But as long as loneliness, vulnerability, and the hunger for belonging exist, the risk remains that another 764, or something like it, will rise from the shadows. This story isn't just the story of a single cult or a single group of predators. It is the story of how the tools of our digital age, platforms that are designed for connection, creativity, and play, can be twisted into weapons. And it's not just isolated to a creepy dude in his basement. These are children playing games online. It's the story of how loneliness and vulnerability that is multiplied by isolation all creates this fertile ground for exploitation. And it's a story of how cruelty that was once confined to the shadows of fringe forums can grow into something global, organized, and terrifyingly resilient. This began with a teenager in Texas who had a fascination with gore and was thrilled by the power that he found in an online chat room. From there, it spread across continents and ensnared children as young as 9. Its power lay not in doctrine, but its ability to convince children that their suffering was proof of belonging. And I think it's so heartbreaking because that age, that middle school age, maybe from 5th grade through honestly high school, shapes us so much. And we go through so many different feelings. Things feel complex. We don't have a deep understanding of who we are as human beings. I mean, I'm in my 30s and I still feel like I'm discovering myself. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to hear that these young children are being preyed upon because they're experiencing things like depression, anxiety. They're feeling isolated. They may be getting bullied at school. They may think they found a community online that they can connect to and feel supported by. But then they're coerced and convinced to do these unthinkable acts to themselves. And honestly, we're lucky that we haven't yet, as of recording this video, heard of any deaths caused by this group. So if you are a parent out there or a teacher or you interact with children in any capacity, please be aware yourself and teach your children to look out for these warning signs. I think it's important to have an open dialogue about mental health as well. I think it feels a little taboo to talk about it with young children and teenagers, but it's ever important, especially now when children are just more and more exposed to things on the internet. And as many safeguards as I think that parents can provide for their children, it seems that there's always a way to slip through those cracks. So if you are a parent and you have any online protection advice, please leave it down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this case or if you have experienced something like this. And please just be careful with everything you do online. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I know this has been a dark one. It's been a very dark week. And I really hope you're all taking care of yourselves. Please give yourself time to love yourself, connect with your loved ones, and just never take anyone for granted. It does feel like, I don't mean to end this video on a dark note, but it just does feel like we're kind of in dark times right now. So please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you soon. Thank you.